All right, this is Mr. Red Fox, and this is part one of my What If Breath of the Wild Was Good video. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be like, but Breath of the Wild is great. I'm not going to say that cast aspersions on people who enjoy that game. I think that some of the best Legend of Zelda game ever, 10 out of 10s, I don't think so. I think there's a lot of issues with this game that keep it from being like the GOAT, greatest of all time. Um, and in part one, I'll be discussing how I think, how, as a fan of the Legend of Zelda series, how I think that Breath of the Wild could be better. So this is going to be me essentially rewriting the story in part one, and which will also touch a little bit upon the gameplay. All right. So with that being said, let's move into the main topic after the cut. So here's, as the title placard says, the big thing about Breath of the Wild is ultimately the story that is there is actually a tale of redemption. Um, like the big thing is that Link and Zelda try to face off against Ganon, or this game's version of Ganon, and essentially speaking, their master plan of using the Guardians, both the small Guardians and the big Guardians, to take on Ganon's army of monsters fails because Ganon's dark magic subverts the very magic that powers these Guardians, turning them into his own army, which he then turns on the Hylians who are fighting, including the giant Hyrule Mechazords, and they win. Ganon wins. Um, Link is horrifically injured. Princess Zelda has him put into a restorative trance, and she uses her magical abilities in order to essentially um, uh, uh, hold Ganon at bay for 100 years. Meanwhile, meanwhile, like hoping that eventually Link can be restored and go on his quest to save Hyrule. The story is very bare bones, very by the book. I mean, we've seen variants of this story many times in the Legend of Zelda series. Um, and it could be a lot better. So, with that being said, let me let me spin you a tale on how the story and therefore the gameplay could be a lot better. Um, because of the story. Imagine, if you will, a Breath of the Wild where instead of it beginning on the Great Plateau and you essentially being woken up, going through four tutorials, actually five tutorials, getting the runes and all that type of stuff. If we did something a little bit different, let me paint you a picture. Imagine if the beginning of Breath of the Wild instead begins during the war, um, like the final conflict between um, Princess Zelda and Link and the Hyrule Guardians facing off against Ganon, and like initially, like you can, like your characters have it under control, and as the fight continues to Hyrule Castle, uh, there's a point where the Guardians, which are their color scheme of corrupted guardians is red instead of blue. Is that these corrupted guardians start turning, culminating with even the giant Hylian Mechazords, Hyrule Mechazords, uh, essentially being corrupted. And uh, you having the Link getting his ass kicked, and Zelda essentially uh, having to drag his almost mostly dead body away. And that is the beginning of the game. You essentially, at this point, you see Ganon, you see Link put into a trance, and you see Zelda essentially go to Hyrule Castle and use her magical powers to seal Ganon away. But it's at a cost. Zelda is essentially she pulls kind of like a suicide kamikaze attack type thing. So even though this happens, she's not going to have a happy ending. Just there's not going to be a happy ending for her. Cut to Link waking up on the Great Plateau. Now, the Great Plateau would be very different from in a better story than it is. The Great Plateau is not empty except for the ghost of the King of Hyrule. The Great Plateau has been turned into a refugee camp where essentially the Zoras, the Gorons, the Hylians that are left, the Gerudo that are left, are essentially living on the Great Plateau. This doesn't mean everyone who belongs to those various races are living on the Great Plateau, but a lot of people are living on the Great Plateau, and they're essentially just trying to, they're just trying to live their best life. I mean, and you discover that Hyrule has been carved up. Each of the regions of Hyrule have been carved up by various members of Ganon's army of minions. So the Gerudo Desert has been taken over by the Yiga clan. The Zora's homeland has been taken over by Lizalfos. The woods have been taken over by Moblins. You know, like each of these areas have been taken over by some type of group, some type of army that Ganon had from 100 years ago. And so essentially, when you're going into these areas, they're hostile. There aren't any towns or villages initially. Now, as the game continues, as Link defeats and cleanses each of the Zelda Mechazords and defeats the Ganon, the hacked Mechazords, essentially, these Mechazords basically start annihilating these armies, retaking territory, which in turn means that towns and villages begin to get retaken, and the ones like maybe a few hidden towns and a few hidden like settlements, like are repopulated and expanded upon, etc., etc. So over time, you discover that that Zelda essentially used her abilities to seal Ganon away for 100 years. But this was a sacrificial move. So essentially, even if you rescue Princess Zelda and defeat Ganon, she's not going to make it. So Link essentially says, you know, fuck it, I gotta go, I gotta go defeat Ganon yet again. You know, this version of this age old story this age old nut has been roasted yet again. And so the game essentially begins with, or the game essentially, the end game of this game and the story is that your character essentially discovers that everything that you guys did was all part of the master plan of Ganon. He essentially um, let the Hylians gather their army and all that stuff and get the Hyrule Mechazord so that he could hack it and then turn their own weapons against them. And one of his better masterstrokes of strategy. So ultimately, the end game of this story, which culminates with the story, is you approaching Hyrule Castle and fighting your way uh, into Hyrule Castle to take on Ganon. But it's a little bit different than what you got in the initial game. This version, this boss fight is Ganon has essentially not only did Ganon corrupt the Hylian Guardians, the Hyrule Guardians, and the smaller Guardians that look like pteropod robots, he corrupted Princess Zelda. You get to fight Ganon and a corrupted Princess Zelda. And I think that would be a very interesting fight. You know, you have Ganon as a bruiser, basically trying to kick your ass, occasionally using magic, and then a corrupted Princess Zelda shooting energy beams at you. Link having to take out both of them. Maybe there's a point where he manages to purify Princess Zelda for a little bit, and she uses what little power she has left to hold him down for a final strike from Link. Then you get a Berserk Ganon who has been critically wounded, but he's still got some fight left in him. Facing off against Link yet again. The final fight, the final phase of the fight, and then Ganon is defeated yet again. And Princess Zelda smiles at Link and visibly ages before your eyes. She ages and turns to dust and dies. Alright? Because she made that sacrifice to seal Ganon for 100 years. And despite that, you know, there was a price to be paid for that spell. And the price was her life. End of the game is Link at a gravesite where he's, you know, like a memorial site where, you know, it's where Princess Zelda's stuff is, and he's like, yeah, she died, sadly. But there is a post game where you're going around essentially clearing up parts of Hyrule and etc. etc. But that's just my opinion. I think that would be a better story than what we got. With that being said, I'll get to my conclusion after the cut. So, in summary, I think that it would be very interesting to have a Legend of Zelda game where essentially a lot of things are, a lot of characters die. You know, I mean, because the Hylian Guardians died. You know, Link almost died. Zelda sacrifices herself to seal Ganon away. There needs, like, the overarching story of Breath of the Wild is that, you know, a lot of people made sacrifices in order for shit to move forward. but there was still a price to be paid. And I think, it doesn't go deep enough, because at the end of the game, it's like, well, Zelda's back, even though she's been sealing Ganon away for 100 years, and, everything's gonna be okay. It's like, this is kind of stupid. I think that would be a very interesting story. I think that could lead to some interesting gameplay concepts that make more sense than, oh, the Red Moon and Ganon these enemies are just replenished. That's kind of stupid to me. I thought that was very poorly implemented. So, in the next video, we will be discussing how Breath of the Wild's gameplay could be expanded, could be better. So, with that being said, that's the end of this video. Rate, comment, share, subscribe. Give me your opinions on the story. Do you have any ideas that you think could also be implemented in the single player? That's the end of this video. Rate, comment, share, subscribe. Peace. And have a nice day.